What if the US won every war it ever fought? How would its territory look like today? The War of 1812 would make Canada the 51st US state, while the victory in the Mexican-American War would make the US take all of Mexico. The Spanish-American War would give the US Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, along with the other side of the Atlantic. The Barbary Wars would end with the US taking over Libya, Tunisia, and Algeria, with Iraq and Afghanistan falling into the US hands almost 200 years later. Going even further east, the Americans would conquer Vietnam and Korea, while neighboring Japan and Western Germany would make the US a global empire. What if Russia won every war it ever fought? How would its territory look today? In 1552, they would conquer Kazakhstan. Then, 30 years later, the Baltic countries, Poland and Sweden during the Livonian War. A century later, they would occupy Turkey, and Iran 50 years after that. Finland would fall at the beginning of the 19th century, followed by Romania and Bulgaria in 1878. Japan would be claimed after the Russo-Japanese War, and Germany during World War I, along with Hungary in 1956 and Czech Republic in 1968, followed by China 1 year later. Then, Afghanistan would fall in 1989, with Georgia and Ukraine completing their conquests. What if the UK won every war it ever fought? How would its territory look like today? The UK would start by fully conquering France during the 100 Years' War and Ireland at the beginning of the 17th century. After the 7 Years' War, they would occupy Canada and parts of India, which would then be fully conquered after the Anglo-Mysore and Anglo-Maratha Wars. The UK would grab the USA during the American Revolution and China during the Opium Wars. Egypt would fall in 1882 and Sudan in 1899, with the Second Boer War netting them South Africa and Malayan Emergency, Malaysia. What if Germany won every war it ever fought? How would its territory look like today? The Second Schleswig War would make Denmark German. During the Austro-Prussian War, Germany would conquer Austria, and in the Franco-Prussian War, they'd grab Luxembourg. In World War I, Germany would capture Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, while in World War II, they'd expand their territory by occupying the Nordic countries, the UK, France, Belgium, the Netherlands. Then they proceed to wipe out Czech Republic, Slovakia, the Balkan countries, Italy, North Africa, Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, allowing them to take over the world. What if France won every war it ever fought? How would its territory look today? After the 100 Years' War, France would occupy the UK, and Italy a century later. During the Franco-Spanish War, France would conquer Belgium and Luxembourg, while the War of the Spanish Succession would expand French territory with Spain. After the 7 Years' War, France would occupy Canada, Ohio, Louisiana, and British Caribbean islands. But then came Napoleon, who would capture the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and Switzerland. Right after Napoleon comes the African expansion, where France would take Algeria, Senegal, Mali, Niger, Chad, Ivory Coast, and Madagascar. What if Spain won every war it ever fought? How would its territory look today? The Italian Wars would make Italy turn Spanish, and after the 80 Years' War, Spain would conquer the Netherlands and Belgium, which would enable it to crush the UK in Anglo-Spanish War. France would stand no chance in the Franco-Spanish War, and during the War of Jenkins' Year, Spain would take Jamaica, the British Caribbean islands, and Florida. But the Spanish expansion in the Americas wouldn't stop there. During the American Wars, Spain would grab Louisiana, Mexico, and Central America. Then they would take most of South America, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. What if Italy won every war it ever fought? How would its territory look today? After battling for 65 years during the Italian Wars, Italy would conquer France, Spain, and Germany. Then, at the beginning of the 18th century, Austria would fall. Turkey would be claimed during the Italo-Turkish War in 1912, and Hungary during World War I. Ethiopia would be conquered in 1936, followed by Albania in 1939, with Greece and Yugoslavia falling 2 years later.
What if every U.S. state became independent? Who would win in an all-out war? First, Texas and Florida crush every southern state and form a new nation called Fluxus, with Miami as the capital. Then, in the Northeast, New York would go full empire mode, taking the entire Northeast and even grabbing Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana after a shocking blitz attack. But they would fall short of conquering Chicago, as Illinois would push them back hard. Meanwhile, on the West Coast, California would sweep through Oregon, Nevada, and Arizona with ease, sending a clear message to everyone else in the West. Every western state would surrender to California, except for New Mexico, which would be split in half by California and Fluxus, with both sides signing a treaty promising not to fight each other, which would encourage Fluxus to declare war on New York. Weakened, New York would put up a good fight but would eventually fall, further allowing Fluxus to conquer the Great Lakes states, while California would take the rest of the Midwest, setting the stage for another American Civil War between the West and the East this time. California would break the treaty and would launch an attack into Fluxus' side of New Mexico. Fluxus would manage to fend them off and then go on the offensive. Fluxus' army would storm straight through the heart of California, destroying every western state in their path and managing to conquer the whole country.
The United States has existed for less than 3 centuries, but its military has shown up in half the world, and that's not even counting CIA coups or secret operations. In Oceania, the US fought Japan across what are now Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Micronesia, Palau, and the Marshall Islands. Africa, the US bombed Libya in 1986 and again in 2011, fired cruise missiles into Sudan in 1998, ran combat missions in Niger, airstrikes in Mali and Chad, fought street battles in Somalia in the 90s, and even dropped paratroopers into what is now the DR Congo in 1964. In South America, fewer countries were hit, but the US still launched naval or military attacks on Colombia, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. In Asia, the list explodes. The US fought Japan, North Korea, and on South Korea's soil, invaded Vietnam, bombed Cambodia and Laos, conquered the Philippines, sent forces into China during the Boxer Rebellion, invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, fought Iran at sea in 1988, and carried out strikes in Pakistan, Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon. In North America, the US fought Mexico, battled Spain on Cuban soil, invaded Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Grenada, and Panama. And in Europe, American forces fought across France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Austria, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria in World War II, and later bombed Bosnia, Serbia, and Kosovo in the 1990s. Believe it or not, the British Empire managed to attack, invade, or fight in about 171 out of 193 modern countries. That's nearly 90% of the world. So who escaped? In North America, pretty much everyone got the British treatment at some point. So yeah, 0 countries left untouched. In South America, out of 12 countries, only 3 avoided direct conflict: Bolivia, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Africa has 54 countries, and 8 avoided invasion: Mali, Ivory Coast, Togo, Chad, Central African Republic, Republic of the Congo, São Tomé and Príncipe, and Burundi. They escaped the British, but not other European colonial powers. You'd think Europe would be safe, but nope. Out of 44 countries, only 6 were untouched: Andorra, Monaco, Vatican, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and Sweden. 5 of these are so tiny you could drive through them faster than you could hit those like and subscribe buttons. Asia has 49 countries, and only 8 escaped the empire: Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Bhutan, Maldives, Mongolia, and North Korea. At least Kim Jong-un can relax. Just 2 countries in Oceania avoided the British: Micronesia and the Marshall Islands. And Antarctica, the penguins are safe for now.
What would happen if the US and Mongolia swapped places? The USA gets dropped right between China and Russia. Pretty much the worst place on Earth if you're America. At first, it's a cold standoff. Chinese tanks facing American tanks with Russian jets circling the north. China would be the first to break. Huge armies push toward the new American border. But the US fights back, managing to push deep into northern China. American soldiers suddenly find themselves at the doorstep of Beijing when, all of a sudden, Russia strikes from the north after patiently waiting for the US to push too far into China. US forces are now squeezed from 2 sides, China pushing back with everything it has from the south, and Russia destroying everything in their path from the north. The US tries to split its troops, half defending the north, half trying to hold the line near Beijing, but that just weakens both fronts. Overwhelmed, the US attempts to defend itself by launching nuclear attacks on major Russian and Chinese cities. But China and Russia respond with even greater force than before, completely wiping out the USA from the map. What if the US split into red Republican states and blue Democratic states? Who would win in a civil war? Blue states like California, New York, and Washington have the best tech and the most amount of money. But red states like Texas and Florida have the weapons and most of the military. Both sides want what the other has, but blue has a major weakness. They're spread out everywhere, so red America strikes first, and the war begins. They storm right through Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico. Meanwhile, blue occupies Vermont and New Hampshire without a problem. Suddenly, the West Coast is cut off. Red forces storm through Washington, Oregon, and Arizona. California chooses to surrender after being completely surrounded. The Midwest blue states panic. With no California and no backup from New York, they give up without a fight. It all comes down to one final battle: the narrow border between Kentucky and North Carolina. Blue attacks with everything they've got, managing to conquer that narrow path, but North Carolina is surrounded on all sides. North Carolina falls, and Kentucky follows right after, allowing red states to easily occupy the whole country.
What if you woke up tomorrow and Ukraine just gave up? No more fighting, Russia wins. Would peace actually return, or would Europe fall apart next? Imagine Russian flags suddenly appearing in Kiev, Odessa, Kharkiv, and the map of Europe changing overnight. A brand new Russian border appears, right in the middle of Europe. You might think, okay, war's over then. But here's the problem. If one country can get taken like that, why would Russia stop there? NATO would immediately panic. More soldiers would be deployed in Romania, Poland, and Lithuania. Energy prices would surge again, and every country would start buying weapons. If nobody helped Ukraine, would they actually help anyone else? Poland, Estonia, and Finland, they'd all be sweating. And then, the world changes. Nations stop trusting each other. Everyone starts preparing for a future where borders can shift overnight, and one leader's ambition becomes everyone else's problem. Once fear takes over, nobody knows where the next borders will be drawn. So what happens if Ukraine surrenders? The fighting doesn't stop, it just moves closer to everyone else.